just jump right into fundamentals test 3 here with you guys. Maybe the rest of them will be here in a minute. I am going to just go through these questions kind of like I've been doing. Now, I will tell you this, whenever it comes time to take your final exam, you better be familiar with that book, because it's an open book final exam. You're going to have a lot of questions on your final, and you're going to have to look them up in the book. You know what I'm saying?
Exam's going to be
at the end of the term, right before Christmas.
Right before Christmas.
Yeah, it'll be. You'll have a hands-on final exam with probably several. May have some bolt size and stuff. It's a good idea to practice that stuff. Right. And there'll be some other things. Because this course just gives you an overview all the way through. The worksheets I'm giving out this week there aren't that many of them, so we'll be going to be doing some loose cannon stuff, so to speak. But these right here, a lot of them are basically just familiarizing yourself with the serial numbers and the decal and all that kind of thing. Because there's a lot of people out there that don't know that. And like for instance, if you were going to find out, and since you worked at a tire store, if you were going to find out what the tire pressure was supposed to be on a car, where would you get that?
Open the door and it's right there on the inside of the door.
Usually, I mean, yeah, sometimes it's inside the right-hand rear door and crazy places like that, but usually it's right there. Right. It'll be either on the door jamb or right there on the, even on the V. Sometimes it'll be on the VIN decal or on the door. Now, I mean on the door facing, and in both places, what I meant to say. But I have seen situations where if you're going to get a serial number off of a vehicle, the best place you can get it, the most reliable place you can get that serial number is on the windshield, under the windshield, because occasionally these body shops, and I've seen this before, like somebody will have an accident on some kind of a car that's fairly common, and the color is a very common color. When the body shop guy orders a replacement door for that vehicle, he'll say, if it's a purple vehicle, he'll say, I need a door, driver's side front, give me a purple one if you got one. When they get that purple door, they can just put it on there and they're done. They don't have to paint it or nothing. Now, I don't know if they charge you for painting it or not, but the point is, that decal that's on that door may not have the right serial number for that vehicle on it, and it may be 2 or 3 year models either way. I've seen that before. And what we've actually had them go in here and get the decal, get the year model and all off the decal by looking at that. And the 10th digit is the best way to get the year model. Because if you look at the build date, if it's in the fall, it could be one of 2 years. See what I mean? But the 10th digit of that serial number does not lie. And they started in 1980, more or less, with A. That was when their target was. And they went all the way from A and they stopped at Y. They did not use I, O, Q, U, or Z. In 2001, they started using 1. The 10th digit is going to tell you this on every car. I don't care if it's a Volkswagen or a Volvo or any vehicle that you look under the windshield on. That 10th digit is going to tell you what year model it is. 8th digit is engine code. 10th digit is year model. And so you have to be able to have little memory bugs to walk your way through those. Like for instance, I remember things like F is 85 because the number, if you spell 5, it starts with an F. And 95 is an S, because an S looks like a 5. P is a 93, and it rhymes, P rhymes with 93. And V is 97, because it looks like a sideways 7. I come up with those things just for talking. So if you walk up there, you ought to be able to look at that serial number and count back to the 10th digit. You can count either 8 back from the right side of the serial number or 10 from the left side, whichever works best for you. And you'll get to where you can just spot it right away. And you'll know what the year model is on that car if you're looking under the windshield. On the door, may not be right. We've actually wound up getting wrong parts from the parts house because somebody told me it was an 04 when it was actually an 06, because they changed out the door and the sticker on the door indicated it was 2 years older than it really was. So jump into fundamentals test 3 once again. Hazardous materials include all of the following except what? That's an easy one, right? Water. Okay, to determine if a product or substance is being used as hazardous, what do you consult? The material safety data sheet. You'll see those things in just about every industrial place. I've got them here. They've also got, like if you go to Advanced Auto Parts, has got an entire segment of their website that has the MSDS material. That basically is telling you, what to do if somebody swallows it and what it will cause and what kind of hazards there are and all that kind of stuff. Exposure to asbestos dust can cause what? Have you seen the commercials? If you breathe asbestos dust, mesothelioma. Let me tell you something, if you're pulling a brake drum off, you know how when you pull a brake drum off, you see all that dust on there? It's a real strong temptation sometimes to just get an air blower and blow the dust off of there, but if you do that, it becomes airborne, and then people start breathing it, and then you're giving all yourself and all your buddies mesothelioma. So the smart thing to do is always get that dust off of those brakes and brake drums with something wet. You know, if you're spraying with 409 or you use a brake parts cleaner, anything that's wet that keeps that dust from flying is what you're going to want there. But mesothelioma, which is B, is the right answer for that one. Now, wetted asbestos dust is considered to be what? Nothing but solid waste. That's all it is. Wet asbestos dust is not as much of a problem as airborne asbestos dust. Airborne asbestos dust is like zillions of little teeny tiny saw blades, and it causes a lot of lung damage and all that. How you making out over there, Miss Hack? You doing okay? You guys all right? Okay. Okay. An oil filter should be hot drained for how long before you dispose of it? That's a question you wouldn't know if somebody didn't tell you the answer to, wouldn't it? Remember now, you better get familiar with that book, because when you take your final, you're going to have to go through that book and look every one of these up. And I'm going to have you, pretty comprehensive final. Usually when I put my finals together, I put them together so that no two people have any of the same questions on their test. That way you can't copy nobody's paper if you want to. That's good, ain't it? One time, whenever I told the guys I was going to do that, I said, nobody is even having any of the same questions on their test. Okay, what is that? Initially, you're saying, well, that means that even if I see this other guy's paper, it's not that the questions are just mixed up. It's that there's not any of the same questions. And this guy had his name Ben. He goes, crap. It was obvious that he was going to cheat if he could, Okay. Used engine oil should be disposed of by all these methods except what? You don't dispose of it in regular trash. You either ship it off-site for recycling, you burn it on-site in a waste oil-proof heater, and you burn it off-site in a waste oil-proof heater. So you can burn it in a heater. If you got a waste oil-approved heater, it doesn't make smoke, it just makes good heat. And they sell those big old S-shaped things, that's got stove pipe going back and forth, and you burn that oil in there, and it carries through all that, and it just heats the whole shop really well. All of the following are the proper ways to dispose of drained oil filter, except you don't dispose of it in regular trash. Sounds like a swap out, doesn't it? Let's see. What act of organization regulates air conditioning? What act or organization regulates air conditioning refrigerant? Is it the Code of Federal Regulations, Material Data Safety Sheets, the Clean Air Act, or WHMIS, whatever that is? I don't even know what WHMIS is, but C is the right answer for that one. That's the Clean Air Act. Let me say something here. Let me ask you guys, see what you know. This air that we're breathing is what? What's it composed of? This air you're breathing right now. And it's 21% oxygen, 78% nitrogen, and the rest of it's trace gases. There's 1% that's just junk elements. Okay, if you take 100,000 molecules of air and you sample that to find out how much of it's what, you're going to have 100,000. 100,000 is a lot, isn't it? You sample it, you're going to find 35 molecules are going to be carbon dioxide, which is what we breathe out, what the animals breathe out, what our vehicles breathe out. Our vehicles breathe out the same thing that you and I breathe out. Okay, if I've got 35 molecules of carbon dioxide in 100,000, do you know how many of that 35 molecules is man-made? One. Just one molecule. So use that for your framework. You know what I mean? A lot of the times whenever they're squawking about, want everybody to, I don't have a problem with electric cars, because I can fix electric cars just like I can fix gas burning cars. But a lot of the stuff they're talking about, worried about the, carbon dioxide causing global warming and all that kind of stuff, is a bunch of hooey anyway. A lot of times it's just so they can transfer wealth. Now we do want to abide by the law. It's never okay to release refrigerant into the atmosphere, because that's against the law, and I'm not for that anyway. But the long and the short of it is, just remember that the fact of it is, only one of the molecules in 100,000 is a man-made, carbon dioxide molecule. Gasoline should be stored in approved containers that include what colors? Yeah, it's basically supposed to be. What color should you put diesel in?
Yellow.
Would it be, I mean, well, you're thinking about the color of the fuel. But if you got diesel, it's typically in a green container. Yeah. Okay, what automotive devices may contain mercury? All of the above, guys. HID headlights, rear seat video displays, and navigation displays. All right, you guys know what mercury is, right?
Thank you.
Yeah, mercury is actually a liquid metal. The melting point of mercury is below zero. It's really, and it's it's in liquid form out here where we are all the time. All of these statements are correct except A, respirators must be worn when working with some hazardous waste products. B, lower pH numbers indicate a substance is more acidic. C, pure water has a pH of 7. And D, the Environmental Protection Agency does not include corrosive materials in its hazardous waste list. D is the one that's wrong there. That's you guys know about pH levels in water and all? I mean, 7 is water. Okay, going lower than 7 is acid, and going higher than 7 is what? What do they call that? That's alkaline, right? You heard alkaline? Like if you've got, in order for batteries to work, you have to have an out of balance situation, so it's either got to be alkaline or acid. Okay, so what is the pH of battery acid? It's like 1.5. Got it? That's pretty bad, isn't it? I mean, battery acid, you ever splash any battery acid on your blue jeans? That's the last you'll see of them, ain't it? Makes a hole, yeah. But what about Coca-Cola? No, the pH of Coca-Cola is 2.5. It's not quite as bad, but battery acid, but it almost is. It's bad. You can put a T-bone steak in a bowl of Coca-Cola and it'll be gone in 2 days.
What can't you pour Coke on the battery terminals?
Yeah, because acid dissolves acid. Yeah, that's right. One time I was fixing this car back when my son was 16. He's 31 now, but we were over in Savannah, and we were looking at this car that I was thinking about buying for him, and it was a ratty little car that this woman was wanting to get rid of for a couple $100. And I said, well, let's just, she said she didn't drive it anymore, and I said, well, let's just see what we can do. And she had dirty battery terminals, and it didn't have any power steering fluid in it and all that kind of stuff. I was checking all that out, skipping on one cylinder, but still ran pretty decent in spite of that. It'd be okay for him. I mean, he's only 16, I'm not going to buy him a brand new pickup. Anyway, I said, I told this girl, she was standing out there with us, and I says, do you have any, I was going to use what you said, Coca-Cola. I says, do you have any Coke? She said, what do you mean, soda pop? What do you think I meant, So anyway. All right, so let me see. Which of the following section numbers of the Clean Air Act applies to automotive air conditioning refrigerants? That is B. That's 609. That's section 609. 608 is your house air conditioning, right? Technician A says employers must inform their employees about any hazardous chemicals used in the workplace by using material safety data sheets. Technician B says workplace hazardous materials information systems is the Canadian version of material safety data sheets. Now, why we need to know that, I don't know, but 15 is actually C. Both those guys are right. All right, now let's jump down here to bolts and nuts and stuff. This will be something you guys have already been exposed to a little bit. The thread pitch of a bolt is measured in what units? A, millimeters. B, threads per inch. C, fractions of an inch. Or D, both A and B can be correct. That's actually D. It's going to be measured either in millimeters or in thread per inch. On a particular bolt, A and B won't be correct, just A or B typically. Technician A says the diameter of a bolt is the same as the wrench size used to remove or install the fastener. Is that right? That's not right, is it? Technician B says the length is measured from the top of the head of the bolt to the end of the bolt. That's not right either. You're going to measure it from the, like here's a bolt right here. This bolt right here, you're going to start right there under the head of it, right here, and you're going to measure to the tip of the bolt down here. And this one here is a 6 millimeter, and the thread pitch is 1/0, so I got 1 millimeter per, from top of the thread to the top of the thread. Okay, let me see here. Technician A says the diameter of bolt, nope, that's not right, excuse me. The color of a fastener, such as a bolt, is a measure of its what? You notice some bolts are sort of anodized a different color. Tensile strength. Now, what is tensile strength? Anybody tell me what tensile strength is? Very good answer. In other words, the stretching of a bolt. Now, one time, long years ago, and all bolts are not created equal. I was talking about this the other day. I had a puller. I was out at an airport. Okay, here's my puller with my little threads on it. We're at. And the puller's one here. Now this thing I was pulling on down here, well, I was actually trying to push a kingpin out, which is basically was going through here. There was a hole drilled here and tapped. There was a hole drilled here and tapped. I took a cap off there, and I put a bolt here, and I put a bolt here. All right. Now this big old thing, I had to change out the spindle on this thing. Now what happened was, I wound up with a doggone, well, it was a 1.5 ton Chevrolet truck that we had sold. Now imagine this. Put yourself in a position I was in. I was 21 years old, I guess. And so we had this 1.5 ton, the company I was working for, we had this 1.5 ton truck. I was a kind of a shop foreman at the time. And they said, we need this, we're going to put this 1,500 gallon fuel tank, you know, the little bobtail fuel trucks like you see. We're going to put this fuel tank on this truck, and we need you to put a PTO on it and put a pump on it and pipe it. It sounds pretty involved, doesn't it? They had the meters and the pipe and all that kind of stuff, and I had all the stuff to thread the pipe and that kind of thing. And so I did that. I figured out how it was supposed to be piped. I put a PTO on the side of the transaxle, set the backlash on the gear or transmission, set the back shaft on the gears, you know, ran a drive shaft back here to this big old fuel fluid pump, and then I piped into it, you know, mounted it to the frame and all that, and had to engineer all that hogwash. Took it out to the airport. They were going to use it to gas up helicopters. You know these big old huge hose with this big gas nozzle, you know, like you see that they use for big stuff, not like so when they got it out there, they got it full up with fuel. I was supposed to go out and test it. We weren't going to fill it up with 1,500 gallons of fuel and sell it to the people at the airport, because they were going to fuel up helicopters with it with Jet A1. So I went out there and I set the valves on that thing, and I zeroed the gallon meter, and I made sure I was pumping. There was 2 tanks in that 1,500 gallon thing. I made sure I was pumping out of the same tank that I was pumping into. So I dragged that hose out, and I climbed up on top of the truck with the PTO spinning and the pump running, and I had it, and I pulled the trigger, pumping into the same tank I was pumping out of, and it felt like a rocket. It just about pushed me off the top of the truck. That thing was really loose. So I held it for 30 seconds, and then I let go. And so I climbed down off the truck and looked at the meter, and it had pumped 45 gallons in 30 seconds. That thing was a stud. Well, that same truck, they were driving it one day through the Gulf Oil refinery after they had filled up with Jet A1, wherever it was they filled up. And you know, the spindle, you guys have taken, some of you guys, you probably have, you know how whenever you take the little cup off of your brake drum or your whatever's in the front on the thing, there's a little nut, cotter key, you pull that out, you screw it off, you got bearings and all that hogwash. Well, that bearing on the outside had seized up and twisted the end off that spindle. And the brake drum came off. It was 71 mile, had drum brakes on the front. The brake drum came off that doggone thing, and it wiped the brake parts all slam up to the backing plate. Lost them all, destroyed the backing plate. And so, you know, this is the kind of thing, this is the kind of guys you want to be working with. I mean, you want this kind of reputation, I guess. But anyway, I fixed a lot of stuff, you know, and figured out ways to make things work and all. And so the boss man, he says, take your toolbox and put it on your truck and go out to the airport and do whatever you have to get that truck fixed. You know, because we sold it to them and we got to go fix it. That's what I was doing out there. Because to get the spindle off, you got to push the kingpin out and all that hogwash. I had a bolt, and I told a long story, but I had fun. Okay, one of these bolts, on the head of it, they were 2 1/4-inch bolts, and on the head of one of the bolts, and I got an 8-sided bolt there. But anyway, on one of them bolts, I had 3 lines, and on the other one I had 3 lines. It was just alike. Only one of them had LE on it, which means it was made by Lake Erie, the bolt company. One of them was a foreign-made bolt that had a little triangle on it. Those people that put triangles on it, they don't want you to know who made their bolt. When I started pushing with that puller, they were the same thickness, but one was American-made, one was foreign-made. The foreign-made bolt started stretching. The other one didn't. The difference in the strength, the tensile strength of those bolts was, you know, that was sort of like a little test bed there. Anyway, I had to go borrow a torch from the dadgum hangar helicopter place over there to heat that thing up, get that kingpin out. And I got that truck fixed, you know, in a half a day. It was a booger bear. I had to go all over town looking for parts for it. Anyway, now that I've turned you into a skeleton by boring you out of your skull here, I'm going to keep on with this test here. All right. Let me see. I forgot. Okay, which of the following is a metric bolt? 5/16, 18, 8 millimeter, duh. Half 20, M12 by 1.5. Actually, if you're going to tell somebody which metric bolts you need, they need to know thread, pitch, and bolt size. So you need to go with D on that one. If you just tell somebody and say, if you call up somebody on the phone and you say, I need 8 millimeter bolt, they're going to say, what thread pitch? That's the first thing that's going to be out of their mouth is what thread pitch. If you don't know what thread pitch, they can't help you. Or they'll send you a bolt and probably ain't going to be right. So you need to know your thread pitch. You need to know how long it's going to be. You need to be able to describe it over the phone. That's why it's important to have stuff to measure it with so you can be right whenever you do. Now, sometimes if you're buying an oil drain plug, you can just tell them what it fits. And they'll know what size it is, you know, that kind of thing. So the bolt that's threaded into a casting is often called a... Now, that's a sort of a peculiar question, by the way, but it's called a cap screw. Basically, if you know what a socket head cap screw is? You ever heard of that? So Allen wrench fits it. Head of it looks like a socket. Got it? Socket head cap screw. Huh?
The one that's got a head of socket and got an Allen wrench hole in it?
Well, you're thinking tamper-proof.
Okay.
That's a tamper-proof Allen wrench, and there's also a tamper-proof Torx. And what a lot of people don't realize is a Torx bit actually works better on an Allen screw if you can find one that's tight than an Allen wrench does. It's less likely to round it out. Let's see. The mark or the lines on the head of a bolt indicate what? That's D, both B and C. Grade and tensile strength. 22. A bolt that requires a 1/2 inch wrench to rotate is usually what size when you measure it across the threads? You guys remember that from your nut and bolt sizing exercise? Usually it'll be a 5/16. Okay, what metric size is close to 5/16? What metric size is really, really close to 5/16, so close you can't tell them apart? Try 8 millimeter. 8 millimeter and 5/16 are almost exactly the same. All right. You guys need to know about those wrench sizes, don't you? Okay. You know your wrench sizes really well? Huh? Quarter. What's the next size up from a quarter?
Quarter would be
5/16. What's after that? Got any idea? Anybody know?
That would be a 1/2 bit. 3/4.
3/8. How about this? What's next? 7/16. 1/2 inch. 9/16. Now there are some sizes in between there that are stupid 17/32 and crap like that. Those are called Whitworth sizes, and they only fit old British motorcycles. But they come with Craftsman tools. I mean, your Craftsman tool set, if you buy 475-piece Craftsman tool set, you'll get 8-point sockets, which are only good for square bolts like they use on plows and stuff. And you'll also get them Whitworth sizes. And they always masquerade as the size you're actually looking for. Like a 25/32 is one size bigger than a 3/4. To Sam, how good is that? Unless you're working on an old British motorcycle. Got me? All right. 9/16. I'm not going into the Whitworth sizes right here, by the way. 9/16. What's next? One size bigger than 9/16, guys. What is it? 5/8. 3/4. 13/16. 7/8. 1 inch. That's as far as we're going to go. Right? You got that? Okay. Now then, I got a reason for doing this. I'm not just trying to bore you silly. All right. 5/16 is real close to 8 millimeter. Real close. So close that you can interchange the tools. Right? 3/8. 3/8. 10 millimeter is, 3/8 and 9 millimeter are fairly close, but they're not exact. Now 10 millimeter is between 3/8 and 7/16. 11 millimeter is, I messed that up. 11 millimeter and 7/16 are really, really close. Can you memorize this stuff? There's going to be a pop test on it tomorrow. Okay. 1/2 inch, 9/16, 1/2 inch, 13 millimeter is a shade bigger than a half, but a shade smaller than 9/16. You got me? 14 millimeter is a shade smaller than a 9/16. 5/8 and 16 millimeter are really close. 15 is by itself. Okay, 3/4 and 19 are the same. 18 is by itself. Okay, 13, 16, 7/8 is real close to 22. 21 millimeter and 13/16 are sort of close, but sometimes you'll have trouble when you try to interchange those. You know, it won't be quite right. 7/8 and 22 are really close, and then 1 inch and 25 are really close. But just remember that. You know, you can. I kind of knew that most all my life because my dad ran that Volkswagen shop, and he knew which sizes would fit what, and so I learned that from him when I was a really young boy. But anyway, but if I pop test you on that, I'll be able to walk up to you and just ask you, what's the same as a 5/8? You should be able to say 16 millimeter. Just spit it out. You know what I'm saying? List, define, explain, all that kind of stuff. All right, now then. Now, I will tell you that I left one out. 11/16 is the size I left out. That is so goofy. I left out 11/16. I cannot believe I even did that. 11/16 and 17 millimeter is real close. But 17 is a little smaller than 11/16, but you can usually interchange those. I can't believe I left out 11/16. I feel like a buffoon now. That's bad. That's just terrible. I've known that forever. All right, now then, when you're doing that off the top of your head, sometimes you can make a mistake, though. One time I thought I made a mistake, and then I found out that I didn't make a mistake after all. So, all right, let me see here. Let me see. Screw that can make its own threads when it's installed is called what? What's it called? It's either what now? Either A or C, sheet metal or self-tapping. Somebody talks about a sheet metal screw. That's those screws that, you know, they don't really have machine threads on them. They just look like what you put in like a wood screw or something. You got me? It's going to be looking like one of those. Only a wood screw will have a tapered part of its length above the threads and between the threads and the head that doesn't have any threads on it. Now a sheet metal screw will usually have threads all the way up. And now they got screws that go into plastic and all that. All of the following are types of clips except what? Cotter. Cotter is a pin. It's not a clip. E-clip. An E-clip looks like an E. You seen those? Anybody know what it is? An E-clip? It looks like an E. You've seen them. You just haven't thought a lot about them. All right. I hope y'all wrote this down. This is one away now. All right. So an E-clip kind of looks like, I ought to have one in my hand to show you. And it kind of looks like this.
Yeah.
That's an E-clip. Now, if somebody says E-clip, you need to know what you're talking about, right? And then an internal clip, external clip. You know, look, they got some that are just...
looks like an arm.
They got little holes on them. And that would be, the one I just drew right there would be like an internal snap ring. They've also got them where they look like this. And they got holes in them. And you got special pliers that you can retool and take them apart so that they can either, you know, spread them or pull them in. Now those are, but cotter pins, you know what those are. That little cotter key like you stick through your castellated nut or whatever. Okay, let me see. Number of threads per inch is referred to as what? That's number 26. What is it? That's B. That's called pitch. Metric thread pitch is measured in what? You guys don't go brain dead on me. You know what it is. What is it? Millimeters. That's all right. The strength or classification of a bolt is known as what? What do you think? Number 28. That's the grade, fellas. The grade of the bolt. All right, you remember the metric grades have numbers on them. The standard ones, the you know, English imperial ones have got your, which is what we use, you know, what we used a long time. We're going metric now pretty much on that stuff. One of the things I'm not really looking forward to is when if they start putting kilometers on our road signs. You know what I mean? They already got kilometers on our speedometer, some of them on the inside of the range. Let me see. Hardware store non-graded bolts are suitable for use on suspension components. Is that true or false? If you got a bolt that ain't got no marks on it at all, it's a grade 2 and it's just liable to shear. Metric bolt strength is indicated by what? Well, I've told you this, guys. Tell me. Somebody say it loud. Remember, your right hand is the one you left with, right? It's confusing, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So let's back up here. 26, the number of threads per inch is referred to as pitch. 27, metric thread pitch is measured in millimeters. 28, the strength or classification is grade. 29, the hardware store non-graded bolts are not suitable for use in suspension components. That's false. 30, metric bolt strength is indicated by numbers on the head. 31, when you're working with hand tools, always pull the wrench if you can. If you can't pull the wrench, you do whatever you got to do. Number 32, the proper term for channel locks is what? I mean, everybody calls them channel locks. Some people call them water pump pliers, you know. But basically what they're wanting here in this thing is C, multi-groove adjustable pliers. You guys all know what those are? You know, they're usually got a bunch of grooves and you can make them grab any size. How many of you know that there's only one right way to use those? Whenever you're putting those things on there, there's one way you can put those pliers on there. When you pull on them, they will actually bite and hold on their own. If you try to go backwards, all they do is slip. You know, kind of like a pipe wrench. Yeah. You can only go one way, you know, and expect them to bite. Okay, so what tool listed here is a brand name? Lock-in pliers, side cutters, monkey wrench, or vice grips? What's a brand name then? Vice grips is a brand name. Two technicians are discussing torque wrenches. Technician A says a torque wrench is capable of tightening a fastener with more torque than a conventional breaker bar or ratchet. Is he true or is he false? No, he's not. What is a torque wrench used for, guys? How many of you guys have used a torque wrench yet?
Torquing your bolts down so
they're... Oh, torquing your, well, cylinder heads, anything that's important. Wheel studs. Okay, let me mention something about wheel studs while I'm thinking about it, because if I don't say this, I'll forget it. I had a guy that emailed me through my website, askamechanic.info website, and he said, I've got a Jeep Cherokee, and the left front tire keeps coming off. And hey girl, come on in here. I'll see if I can email you a work order request. But anyway, so he says my left front wheel keeps coming off. He said we tighten the bolts really, really hard with a torque wrench, you know, to 100 foot-pounds and all this, and it comes loose again. None of the other wheels are coming loose, just the left front one. And so I sent him a little, you know, one-line email that fixed his problem. Can you imagine what that was? I said, take all of those lug nuts off of that wheel and lay them aside. Take one lug nut off of each of your other wheels and put it on there and torque it. And see what that does. Because you got the wrong lug nuts. Your lug nut, the little taper on those lug nuts is not the right taper for the taper on that wheel. And if you'll get the right lug nuts, you won't have this problem anymore. And he emailed me back about 2 days later, and he goes, that was exactly what it took. They never came loose again. Now, you can't look at them and tell. It's real hard. But if you got some that's got repetitive lug nuts coming loose, make doggone sure that you get the right ones for the wheels. If somebody's got aftermarket wheels on there, and they tried to use the lug nuts for their factory wheels, like your lug nuts for a factory wheel might have been pretty little chrome lug nuts. I'll just use these instead of spending $50 on a new set of lug nuts. Well, you need to buy the ones that's made to go with that wheel. If you don't buy the ones that made to go with that wheel, that will come off. Just think about that. That may save somebody's life one day. You got me? And because I've known people that had tires that kept coming off, and they never could figure out what it was, and it turned out bad lug nuts on it. All right, let me see here. I forgot where I was. Okay, technician B says that a torque wrench should be calibrated regularly for the most accurate results. Who's right about that? B. A torque wrench ain't going to torque anything any tighter than you can torque it anyway. But I will tell you this. You know the torque wrenches that you screw the handle up on? Always screw it back to 0 when you get done with it so it doesn't lose its calibration. But the split beam torque wrenches, like that big snap-on we got in there, you know, that's basically, you got a little thumb wheel and a little dial. When you dial those, you can leave that one set wherever it's at and it won't hurt it. But the ones that you screw the handle up to set the torque, you always put them back on 0. A lot of people won't do that, particularly around here. You know, when you're working with your own tools, you tend to treat them different than you do when you work with somebody else's. You guys, have you guys ever borrowed a lot of stuff? You like to borrow stuff? Huh? Huh? Yeah. This guy that, he was a real, you know, these hillbilly guy that really talks like Snuffy Smith or something, with a big old beard on his face and all that sort of stuff. And he's over rooting around in another mechanic's toolbox. I said, what are you doing in Philip Kirkland's toolbox? And I look at my cylinder hone. And I said, well, why ain't you got a cylinder hone? You're an engine mechanic. Said, my brother borrowed my cylinder hone. He didn't bring it back. I said, why don't you get your brother by the beard and jerk him around? He goes, how'd you know my brother had a beard? Well, I couldn't imagine him not having a beard because this guy was Hillbilly City, you know. But the long and the short of it was he shouldn't have been borrowing somebody else's something as important as a cylinder hone. Somebody don't know how to use a cylinder hone, they'll bust the rocks on it, and the rocks can be as much as $20, you know, for a set of rocks and all that. Be careful about that. If you borrow something a couple of times, you need to buy your own. If you're doing this kind of work for a living, you know, that's important. I mean, you need to be the guy that doesn't go around borrowing everybody else's tools, because that ticks people off over time, and they lose respect for you. What type of screwdriver should be used if there's very limited space above the head of the fastener? I always like to use a 1/4-inch air ratchet with a little screwdriver. But basically what they're telling you is you're supposed to use an offset screwdriver, which is a sort of a chintzy question. And where is the peen of the hammer? What in the world is that? How many of you guys, you know the hammer that's got the ball on the back and the regular, yeah, the ball peen hammer, that's right. The peen side's the back side. Now, you ever use that for, what do you use that for? Yeah, I mean, like, under what circumstances? What would you peen? Pretty good question, isn't it?
Got an inner fender with a peen in it.
Sort of, but here's what basically a ball peen hammer is made for. This thing right here is not a bolt. Okay, it's going through 2 pieces of metal, and it's a rivet. It's made out of soft metal, and you take that ball side of that peen hammer, and you beat the crud. You put another hammer under here that you're holding under there, and you bang on that one, and you ding it all up, and you swell it out so that it can't come out of there. You're basically, that's how you put a rivet in by hand, you know. It's soft metal. Now, under what circumstances would you have to do that? Automotive, never. Almost farm equipment. Like if you're replacing sickle blades on a combine, you have to do something like that. Use your little 9/16 to take them little. Do you know what a carriage bolt is? Anybody know about that? That's part of this bolts and nuts thing. You ever heard of a carriage bolt? You've seen them, but you don't know what you call them, right? A carriage bolt has got a head that looks like this, and it's got a square, and then it's threaded.
Yeah.
That's a carriage bolt. Yep. The reason they call it a carriage bolt's when you put it together with that, you know, if you're sliding stuff in there or putting stuff around, these little round heads have a tendency not to hang up on your clothes or your boxes or anything like that. They call them a carriage bolt. What type of hammer is plastic coated, has a metal casing inside, and is filled with small lead balls? Anybody know? Why would they do that? Why would they fill it with small lead balls on the inside? Actually, it's a dead blow. When you hit it, it doesn't bounce. Like some of them will have a metal face. And the snap-on guy, when they first came out with these, he'd say, okay, take this, there's an anvil here, he had it in his truck. He says, hit this with this steel hammer. And you'd hit it and it would ding, it would bounce. You know, a steel hammer will bounce. Well, that dead blow hammer goes, and it just stops. Here's something else that's interesting about these lead balls. One day when I was working, I was pumping gas back in the early 70s at a gas station. And this guy stopped, and he was checking the air pressure in his tires, because we had air out at the pumps like they used to have years ago, but don't anymore, you know. And he said, my air pressure's got to be just exact. And I said, how come? He says, because I've got my tires set up to balance themselves. And I said, really? He said, how'd you do that? And he said, well, he had a piece of hose that he had made it just the right size. It was a stiff piece of water hose, and he made it just the right size to just pop up into the bead on his wheel where it wouldn't come out. And he had it about 1/3 full of lead shot, like 6 shot out of shotgun shells. And he says, when you're driving down the road, the lead shot automatically goes to the light side of the wheel, and your tires are perfectly balanced all the time. But the air pressure has got to be perfect in order for that to work. The only time I ever saw that. However, you know these Neptune washing machines that spin about 10,000 RPM? We had one of those doggone front-loading Neptune washing machines. That thing sounded like a jet taking off when it would spin. I don't know how fast it spun. Plumb scary, you know, things would come apart and destroy everything in the garage. But anyway, it had a ring on it, from what I was able to tell, that had some weights in there that balanced it that way. So apparently that works. This guy must have been some kind of an engineer or something. I've never seen anybody do that since then. It's not widely known, but this guy, he didn't seem like he was kind of a yo-yo, you know. There's other people that do stuff. They just do stuff the way that it seems normal to them. There was a guy one day that come pulling up out there at the gas pump with a brand new Grand Prix, mid-70s Grand Prix or whatever. And I was working there for a while. And it had the, you know, one of these Landau tops on it, and it was a green color. It was a beautiful car, but it had scratches on top of it. I said, what do you do with these scratches on top of your car, man? You know, I was pumping, his full service gas station, I was pumping his gas. He's standing there talking to me. And he said, I was hauling some bicycles. He just put them up on top of the car and tied them down. Just scratched his paint off. You know, take the wheels off the bicycles and put them in the trunk, man. You know, that's what you're supposed to do. Anyway, let's see. What type of pliers is capable of fitting over a large object? Anybody know? What about multi-groove adjustable plier? Channel locks, man. Which tool has a replaceable cutting edge? Dumb questions, huh?
Utility knife.
Utility knife. Which tool is most commonly used by automotive service technicians? That depends on the technician, doesn't it? 41. That's going to be a wrench. Although the ones of us that do like the front end work that you have to do, use a hammer quite a bit, don't you? And I was telling these guys out here, I said, okay, you know, whenever you got a ball joint, I mean, not a ball joint, instead of a tie rod in, you don't hit it on the threaded part, you hit it on the side, right, when you're popping it loose. And I say, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to hit this thing so that it'll jump out, you know. And so they get these hammer and they go tap, tap, tap.
Oh my.
You gotta let this thing, you gotta let the hammer do the work. You know, you're gonna swing it like you're gonna kill it. So you gotta hit this thing like you're gonna, well, I think they're afraid they're gonna miss it. And sometimes, well, sometimes I miss it when I swing it too, but anyway. But if you don't swing that hammer like you're gonna kill it, you know, you're not gonna get your job done. Or hitting a pickle fork to get one broke loose too, you know. But my son Matt was holding a pickle fork with a pair of vice grips one time at the tire store where he was working for about 4 years. And they were banging it with some big old hammer. I mean, you know, trying, because it was real hard. You know, some of the front end stuff, when you're trying to get this stuff loose, you're thinking, some of them they just pop right out of there, and some of them you will beat and beat and beat and beat on them thing, drive yourself crazy trying to get them off. And they hit that thing, and that pickle fork jumped out of there, and it hit him right here. You know, the sharp part of it hit him in the face, and he made a little bobo on his face, you know, and all that. But he was telling me that you know, it takes a lot of grip to hold that thing while they're banging it with a hammer, you know. All right, let me see. Which type of wrench is used on fasteners that don't require a lot of torque? Think about it. I wanted to say something about this earlier and I forgot about it. Open end. Anytime you can, everybody listening to me? Anytime you can, use the box end, not the open end. Don't use the open end when you can get a box end on it if you're breaking it loose. Now, once you get it broke loose, you can flip it around and use your open end. But if that thing's hard to turn, you know, and I don't know at the times I've had people come over here and they say, this is rounded out, I can't turn it, you know. Well, you know, they're using the open end and they just went ahead and just, you know, kept working with it until they got it totally round. It's really wonderful. Have you ever been in a situation, anybody that's wrenched in here, where you've got one that's sort of trying to round out, and you're trying to get it, you got to get it out of there. You can't give up, and they're going to know that you don't know anything if you have to go ask for help all the time. If you take a 6-point socket, or like if you had a 12-point socket, you'll round it out in a hurry, particularly if you use an impact wrench. Get a 6-point socket and put some valve grinding compound in there. This gritty gray stuff like they grind valves with, and that gives it a grip that you can't match any other kind of way. Now, the diesel department, what they teach, and there's nothing wrong with it, is dip the socket in some oil and throw it in the sand. and then pick it up and put it on there, and that sand helps it grab. So you can do it that way too. Now, I don't really like sand around what I'm doing, but if you're working on diesel and equipment stuff, hey, there's going to be dirt anyway, everywhere, anyway, so. Okay, but just always remember to always use your box end, and if you can use a 6-point socket, always use a 6-point socket unless it's a 12-point bolt. Some 12-point bolt heads, like a drive shaft retaining bolts on a Ford, or 12 millimeter 12 points. You got to have a 12-point, but if you can use a 6-point, always do. A 6-point wrench is pretty good, but you have to turn it about, quite a few degrees to get a bite on your next, bite on it. And so, but anyway, always use a box end when you can. Technician A says an adjustable wrench has a box on one end and an open at the other end. That ain't right. Technician B says a combination wrench has a box at one end and open at the other end. And 44 is B. I stopped buying adjustable wrenches for my personal toolbox years ago when I worked at the offshore services company. All these yo-yos coming in off the dock wanted to borrow a crescent wrench, and they never came back. They never came back. So I quit buying them. I just said, I don't have a crescent wrench anymore. And they would get plumb disappointed and upset because they wanted a crescent wrench. I'd say, well, I got a big old wrench here. You can take that. It may fit. Well, they don't carry that all the way down there. They want something that can fit every bunch of stuff. Technician A says adjustable end wrenches should be used to tighten fasteners. Technician B says adjustable end wrenches can round the edges of fasteners. B is right about that. You can tighten a fastener. If you're not going to be putting a lot of torque on it, you can use a crescent wrench. I don't really call it a crescent wrench. That's a brand name, basically, but it's an adjustable wrench. Okay. Did anybody get terribly bored with this session here? Not too bad. I try to tell you stories every now and then. Y'all are just being polite. That's what you're doing. You're shaking your head. I'm bored now.